Hey everyone, welcome back to the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I'm Dan Harris, joined by Mike Tagliere. You can find us on Twitter at DanHarris80 and at Mike Tagliere NFL. Thanks to Grammarly for supporting the Fantasy Pros Fantasy Football Podcast. Grammarly is a communication tool that helps people improve their writing to be mistake-free, clear, and effective. Start writing confidently by going to Grammarly.com/fantasypros to get 20% off a Grammarly premium account today. Tags, how you doing?
I am doing fantastic, partly because my wife worked today, and that means that I don't really have anybody to cook me meals. If she works during the week, it is what it is, and I can fix myself something to eat, while I'm taking a break from work or whatever. But on Sundays, it's like there is no leaving the televisions and there's no leaving the man cave, so I just kind of snack all day. And my dinner consisted of, I felt like Bobby Sylvester, just sitting in front of my TV watching football and eating ice cream for dinner. That was my dinner today.
I mean, you and Bobby have such a bizarre outlook on life where literally your good days are when your wife doesn't cook you dinner and you can just eat ice cream all day. I like a home-cooked meal, man. I get it. I take my 13-minute break in between watching football to have dinner with the family on Sundays, and then I run back down to the basement and start watching again. So, personally, I think you're missing out a little bit.
Well, I prefer, so to be fair, I do prefer the home cooked meals as well, but I mean, I've been dieting for so long in terms of what I do, so that when I have a cheat day, I kind of appreciate it.
I think that's fair, Tag. See, my problem is I just have naturally the perfect physique, so I don't diet or do anything. I can just eat whatever I want. It's fantastic. My wife would totally agree if she were on this podcast right now. Enough of this. Let's get into it. Who's your big winner for the day?
Big winner for the day. I mean, if I say anybody other than Stefon Diggs, it has to be wrong, right?
That's true.
He kind of killed it where he was supposed to. And him and Thielen, I said 2 weeks ago that they, with the schedule they had coming up between the Giants and the Eagles, that you should have been buying those receivers. And I mean, if you want to hang on to Diggs after, seeing what he did today, that's fine, because they're going to have 2 of the next 3 games coming up are good. But I mean, his stock definitely improved, but at the same time, I tend to sell high on players like this, where it's like, we know that this is a run-first offense. We knew that Philadelphia could, they shut down the run, and they did. They shut down Dalvin Cook today, and the Vikings game plan well. They got Diggs the ball, and he actually should have had even more. He had one drop. The one interception that Cousins threw was actually off Stefon Diggs' chest. So, but yeah, Stefon Diggs is definitely the biggest winner here.
Yeah, 11 targets, 7 catches, 167 yards, plus 18 yards rushing, and the 3 touchdowns. Now, I 2 things here. First of all, Tags, my whole shtick with this thing, we do What's Your Problem, Man, which I love, where I basically call you out. And what I do there is I usually look for differences in our rest of season rankings. I see where you are much higher on somebody who had a particularly bad day or vice versa, and I go into it. But I want to at least here give kudos to you, because you kept the faith with Diggs. I mean, you had him at 25 in half PPR rankings rest of season coming in. I had him 11 spots lower. So kudos to you at least for keeping the faith there in terms of what you wanted, even though you're essentially sort of calling him necessarily a sell high. I do have one question with that, though. The Vikings offense, the last 2 games, has clearly looked better. I mean, it was a matchup thing, especially today. As you said, it's clear the Eagles struggle in their secondary. They shut down the run, so it was a good game for the passing game. But since they've complained, the offense sort of has opened up the passing game a little bit more, and it looks better. It looks better than when they just sort of pound Dalvin Cook nonstop and run, at least in my opinion. Do you think at all that this might be a little more of a trend going forward, where they're going to air it out a little bit more going forward, not just because of a matchup like this, but generally they're like, hey, our offense looks a little better this way. Maybe we should keep this going.
Not generally, no. I just think this is really matchup dependent, and knowing, again, like last week, it was a chance to build some confidence, and we didn't see them throw the ball a whole lot. We did see Thielen get off the, kind of the fantasy floor and score, but again, I don't want to take too much from one game. Again, this Vikings defense is legit. They're not going to have to throw the ball a whole lot. In order to rack up the pass attempts, they essentially need someone that can consistently score on the Vikings defense. And the Eagles, they proved the ability to at least be a threat and force the Vikings to stay throwing the ball, because if not for that, I think we would have seen like 40 rushing attempts out of the Vikings offense. So it's really matchup dependent. So Diggs is still a high-end wide receiver 3 in my books. I don't want to sell him for nothing, but if you can get someone to pay you top 15 prices after this performance, which I think you can, because people tend to overreact. It was the same thing with Will Fuller last week. People were telling me like they were trading away Will Fuller for like all sorts of goodies. So if you could find someone, because Diggs, even going back to the Bears game like a few weeks back, he went over 100 yards against the Bears, so it's not like he's been terrible.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the types of games where Diggs is going to succeed are really where defenses are going to get pressure on Cousins quick, right? Because he that's really what he does. That's where he has to get the ball out quick. That's more the Diggs. That was like against Chicago, right? That was when he had the big game. So, and the Packers, he scored the touchdown, and he could have had 2 there. Again, another team that gets to the quarterback. So I completely agree. If you can sell high, like, Fuller showed what it's like. Today he came back down to earth, as most people should have expected. So certainly if you could sell high on that, go ahead. I just think, given the fact that they opened it up a little bit more against the Giants still, not crazy when they didn't have to necessarily. I'm wondering whether or not they go to the air a little bit more here, but I think everything that you're saying is fair. And let's move then to your biggest loser.
Biggest loser of the day for me is Damian Williams. I really did feel like with Patrick Mahomes dealing with the ankle injury, knowing that he was missing his left guard, his left tackle for this game, knowing the Houston pass rush with J.J. Watt, I was like, okay, they're going to involve the screen game. They're going to get Damian Williams the ball. They're going to do that. And in the week prior, we saw LaShawn McCoy get 2 touches and nobody else touched the ball outside of Damian Williams. So I was like, even though none of them produced at a high rate, it was like, okay, if we were to extrapolate this, multiply it by 2, we're talking about 4 touches for LaShawn McCoy. That's not a big threat to Damian Williams. And then we go to this game, and LaShawn McCoy outsnaps him 27-21, out-touches him. Damian Williams sees 2 touches in this game. Andy Reid told us in the offseason that this was going to be a timeshare, and, we talked about this on last week's show and saying it's difficult to take much away because it was a really odd game in week 5, but now that we have another game of sample size, this is clearly a backfield that you're not going to be able to trust on a weekly basis, and, Damian Williams is nothing more than a mediocre RB3 right now with an extremely low floor.
Yeah, I mean, he does score the touchdown, right? So the one thing is, that's the thing. It is something where he scored a touchdown. You might be able to play it off that in the trade market, but he got 2 touches. Like you said, LaShawn McCoy got 10 touches. Why they only ran the ball 10 times, I mean, they just completely abandoned it and they were throwing the whole game. But let me ask you something then. You had Williams ahead of McCoy coming in. Are you switching that this week? Are they both just people completely to avoid?
I think this week I'm probably going to say that McCoy's the better option. They're playing on Thursday night against the Broncos, and I'm probably going to have to go with McCoy just considering he outsnapped him. So going back to week 5, it's possible that maybe LaShawn McCoy was like they were just basically just giving him a week of rest from that ankle that he'd been dealing with for a couple weeks, and he did practice in full all week this week, so maybe that's just a sign of things to come. He did look good in this game, so I don't think that they should definitely take away that role. So I'm right now I have to assume that it's LaShawn McCoy's job, but I say that with 0 confidence.
Okay, that's good. I like when we have 0 confidence in things. It makes me feel better because I also have 0 confidence. I do not have 0 confidence in my ability to question you on what's your problem, man. My favorite segment personally, and I was saying to Tags before we started recording, I'm going to be honest here. Again, I just explained what I usually do. I look for differences in our rankings, places where we're really different, and I try to see somebody who did particularly well, or it's someone who favors me because I'm the host. I can do what I want. It was hard this week. I'll be honest. When we were off, it was mostly Tags being right on the money on this one for his rest of season rankings, but don't worry, I found 1 or 2, and we'll start with Courtland Sutton. Now, this was not the best game from Sutton at all. I mean, he had 4 catches, 76 yards in a tough matchup against Tennessee, but he's got 7 targets or more in every single game, 3 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks before this one. Now, Emmanuel Sanders left today's game with an injury, but even before then, Tags, you had him 40th in your rest of season half PPR rankings. I had him 24th. That 16 spot difference is the biggest difference in any ranking for us at any position, and I wish he had a bigger game today so I could do more with this, but still, what's your problem with Courtland Sutton? I mean, why isn't he a borderline reliable wide receiver too?
He's actually been moving up my board, and I actually, even with his slow game today, I did move him up to wide receiver 34. Seeing the consistent targets is one thing, and that's good. And he's done a lot of it after the catch. So it's like a lot of that stuff I don't want to rely on. It's kind of like an A.J. Brown scenario where A.J. Brown has done a ton after the catch, and eventually that's going to catch up to him where it's going to slow down. And if he doesn't get that production after the catch, it's like, what is really happening? It's the same reason I didn't want to draft Courtland Sutton. It's the same reason I didn't want to draft Emmanuel Sanders. I rarely ever want to tie myself to a Joe Flacco receiver. Even going back to his Baltimore days in his prime, I mean, Derek Mason was probably the closest thing that Joe Flacco ever had to a consistent fantasy wide receiver. Steve Smith had some games up and down, sure, but Flacco has just been overall just a mediocre quarterback, and it definitely helps that he's getting targets, and that's why I did move him up upon actually yesterday. I'm such a nerd, dude. Like, my Saturday night was filled with sitting around creating a new spreadsheet, kind of looking at opportunity and the consistency of targets. And that's where I came across some things, including Courtland Sutton, and like how rare it is to have a wide receiver that's being targeted at least 7 times per game. But again, he is still tied to Joe Flacco, and it's difficult for me to rank him over guys like AJ Green. I would rather have AJ Green moving forward. I would rather have John Brown, who's also seeing those targets, and his targets are usually further down the field. I would take Will Fuller. I would take Michael Gallup. So when you start talking about those receivers who I have in front of him, it's because I just can't take him over those guys. It's not to say that he's not a wide receiver 3 in fantasy right now, because he is, but I'm hesitant to fully trust him.
I get all that. I'm not going to go crazy here with Sutton, but I don't know, man. I mean, I get you don't want to go crazy with a Flacco-led offense, but Flacco hasn't been terrible this year. I mean, he was on pace for nearly the most yards he had ever thrown for in his career, and I know he's generally started kind of fast. But look, he's got it. He's throwing the ball. It's got to go somewhere. Sutton is doing things after the catch. You're right. A lot of it comes from that, especially I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago where he had that 70-yard catch and run. But I don't know, man. I'll take him over Brown for sure. I mean, especially Sanders is injured. I don't know how serious it is right now, but regardless, he's going up against KC next week. That's certainly something that you're probably going to want to have him in your lineup if you own him. But for me, yeah, I'm not nearly as concerned about him. I look at it as Brown is catching passes from Josh Allen. It's not somebody who I'm super excited about, even though Brown has been great this year. I completely get it. But for me, yeah, he's up there. So I'm willing to accept sort of your rationale for it, but for me, getting the targets, I liked him sort of as a breakout candidate based on his talent, generally. So I'm more than willing to stick with him there. You've up to 34. I'm not going to really argue with that, but I still think in the end he's a top 30 guy.
No, that's fair. And I maybe we can make the argument that the Rams should have traded instead of the Broncos. Maybe the Rams should have traded for Joe Flacco. They look like they could use a quarterback right now.
Oh my goodness, we'll talk about that in a bit. But let's briefly finish up with what's your problem, man, with Curtis Samuel. Again, this is not a big one, so I was stretching here for what I could do at this point just to tease you. But by the way, the Bucs radio broadcasters refer to him as Curtis Samuels, and they need Grammarly or something like that. 4 catches, 70 yards and a score, plus an 8-yard run for a touchdown. He's seen at least 6 targets in every game since week 1. He's had at least 1 rushing attempt in 4 of his last 5 games. You had him 46th in your rest of season half PPR ranks. I mean, it's not crazy. I'm not that, but I had him more like a borderline wide receiver 3. Does today do anything for him, or are you roughly keeping him there?
Yeah, I moved him to 40 overall among wide receivers. And again, he's still behind guys like Tyrell Williams. He's still behind Christian Kirk for me. So that's the range he's in of players. Like, he's still a boomer bust option, and I don't want to take too much away from the small sample size we have with Kyle Allen. It's the same reason that people are talking about Kyle Allen keeping this job, because they're 4-0 with him as the starting quarterback. It's very circumstantial. There's been some good matchups in there for sure. I don't want to take away too much from it. He is the number 2 option. DJ Moore is like, eventually DJ Moore is going to see like some of these touchdowns that Curtis Samuel is getting. And then like when Curtis Samuel is left without touchdowns, the yardage isn't immaculate. So it's just, he's kind of like a borderline wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 for me. So, I mean, I don't think our opinions are too much off on this one. It's just, again, it all comes down to which players I would take over him. And by the way, Emmanuel Sanders, I did want to say before moving on from him, if his injury is nothing big, it's worth noting that there's been tons of rumors, and it makes all the sense in the world that the Broncos would trade him before the trade deadline. So or maybe we saw the 49ers, a team that's contending now. They just moved to 5-0. That's a team that's very inexperienced at wide receiver. Marquise Goodwin is their actual number 1, though I don't really like that. Maybe they make a play for Emmanuel Sanders.
Yeah, that certainly helped his value. Again, he started off nice this season, and his recovery from the Achilles has been miraculous regardless. But his targets have dipped over recent weeks, so that would be a nice boon for him. All right, let's get into today's games. But before we do, I do want to talk about one of our sponsors, Manscaped, the number 1 option for men's below-the-belt grooming. Look, guys, before you go out, you look your best, okay? You spend some time picking out your outfit, you get your hair right, you put on deodorant, you maybe add some cologne. But even though the general public cannot see what's going on underneath your briefs, that does not mean that you can afford to ignore how you look down there. And that's why there's Manscaped, which offers precision-engineered tools for your family jewels. Look, if you read Tag's primer over the last couple of weeks, you learned about how he and his wife basically accidentally went to a nudist colony, and he got his drawers pulled down while singing karaoke. That's a great story, by the way. If you have not read it, please go back and do it. And that exact same thing happens to 86 men annually, and you have to make sure that you're taken care of down there just in case you're one of those people. Manscaped offers the perfect package 2.0, where you can get an electric trimmer called the Lawnmower 2.0 with waterproof and skin-safe technology that helps protect your two best friends. You can even trim in the shower. You'll also get the Crop Preserver, an anti-chafing ball deodorant and moisturizer, as well as anti-chafing performance boxer briefs and the Crop Reviver ball toner spray. To get 20% off plus free shipping, just go to manscaped.com and use the code FantasyPros. That's 20% off plus free shipping with the code FantasyPros at manscaped.com. All right, Tags, let's get into the games. Let's start with Thursday. Patriots 35, Giants 14. Brady throws for 334 yards on a windy night, gets the 2 rushing touchdowns on the QB sneaks. Julian Edelman with the big game, 9 for 113 with Phillip Dorsett down. And then Josh Gordon leaves with a knee injury. This sounds minor right now, but I do have to ask with Gordon, he's on pace for 53 catches, 765 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Is Josh Gordon droppable in 10 or 12 team formats?
No, he's not droppable. Like, I'm concerned about the injury. I don't know, like, because he came down awkward on it. It didn't look good, and I was like, oh, no. And then we saw him on the bike later in the game, and it's like, okay, it seems like it's not too bad. I wonder if he plays this week. I don't know. But he was someone I considered one of the better buy lows in fantasy football, considering that Tom Brady's averaging like 39 pass attempts per game, even though they're blowing out their opponents. Eventually, that defense is going to start giving up points, and then they're going to rack up even more passing attempts because they're not able to run the ball. So Josh Gordon, it's really all injury related. If anything, this just made Julian Edelman like a borderline wide receiver 1. But I still do like Gordon as a borderline wide receiver 3 right now, and I would definitely not drop him.
Now, you mentioned that they're unable to run the ball, so Sony Michel, he's used 22 carries. He gains just 86 yards. Tom Brady vultures 2 touchdowns. Where are you right now on Sony Michel? Is he still a number 2 running back for you in most formats?
I mean, in standard, yeah, he's like a low-end RB2. In PPR, he's more of like a high-end 3. But, I mean, he has seen a couple targets the last few games, so that's obviously something that's beneficial towards him. But I was watching that game on Thursday night, and all I could think was that Brandon Bolden looked like a better running back. And that's weird because I was a really big Sony Michel supporter coming out of college, but he looks like crap. I mean, there's really no way to do it. He's like, he's walking up to the line and he's like stutter stepping. He has no decisiveness in the way he's running. He's not breaking tackles. I don't know what the Patriots are seeing him right now. I don't know how long he holds onto this job. And to be honest with you, it's really shocking to me that Damian Harris has been inactive all year, because he's somebody that I believe he'd be a better running back for this team right now than Sony Michel has been. And that's not me just saying something to be like a hot take guy. I'm just saying that I think he'd be a better running back right now.
This is really, really bad, Tags. I'm highly concerned, and I've kind of been brushing it all. Being like, he'll get going. It's not a big deal, blah, 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 blah. No, highly concerned at this point, especially because Rex Burkhead has missed the last 2 games. I mean, what's going to happen when he comes back? There's no reason for them to keep just going to Sony Michel right now, because he's really not getting it done. And I know that Brady does the sneak as well as anybody, and it's probably the right play to do, analytically speaking, when you're within the 1-yard line. But still, you kind of feel like if they want to get him going and they want him to feel good about himself, or they cared at all, they'd probably try to get him going. And he couldn't convert early on. He doesn't do well in short situations. I think, on 3rd and 1, stuff like that. His history, at least this year, has not been good. So I'm highly concerned personally. I guess if you own him, for the most part, you're probably still starting him as a flex play, but as an RB2, yeah, I'm barely there in standard leagues at this point.
No, you just kind of have to trust him because he is getting that many touches and the volume is there. I mean, until Bill Belichick gives up on him, which he hasn't, I guess we have to kind of just keep trotting him out there.
Well, my Jets and their top-notch defense, and they're on the rise. They're going to shut him down next week, so don't even worry about that. On the other side of the ball, for the Giants, I mean, they barely had any players left in this game, so let's not draw too many conclusions. But Golden Tate, first wide receiver, I believe, to score a touchdown against the Patriots. 9 targets, 6 catches, 102 yards, and a score. Can he be more than a wide receiver 4 in half PPR leagues, or is that basically where he's going to stay?
No, the volume's going to be there. You have Sterling Shepard, who they're saying could miss like a lot of time, actually. This is a concussion-related thing, and it's been like going on for some time. So they're saying Sterling Shepard might miss multiple weeks. Evan Ingram's dealing with a sprained MCL, which could cost him multiple weeks. So when you start adding everything up, it's like, Golden Tate, you're going to get targeted at least 8 times per game, and that's got a lot of value. Daniel Jones has proven to be a competent quarterback. I don't want to take too much away from the game against the Patriots. So, Golden Tate is kind of like a wide receiver 3, especially with those guys out of the lineup.
Yeah, and then they get Arizona next week. Now, they'll have Patrick Peterson back, but I'm sure he won't take on Tate out of the slot. But, it's not the worst schedule, so it is something where he might be able to do some damage. Let's go to London. Panthers 37, Bucs 26, a game that was not nearly as close as the final score indicates. Let's just start with the Panthers. We've already talked about Curtis Samuel. Christian McCaffrey does almost nothing, but just 57 total yards, but he does get the 2 touchdowns, 1 on a beautiful catch and run. DJ Moore gets a little banged up, fights through it, 7 catches, 73 yards. Kyle Allen, 2 touchdowns, 227 yards. Now, I mean, you alluded to it earlier. You don't think this is going to be a QB controversy then? You think this is Newton's job when he comes back?
No, I think it absolutely is a controversy. That I do believe. I'm just saying that it's such a small sample size that I don't want to say that he's like the better. There's so many people throwing up stats and win-loss records about, Cam Newton and Tyler Heineke's last 9 games or whatever it was with the team and their record, and then like 4-0 the last games, 4 games with Kyle Allen. Win-loss should not be it's almost like a Super Bowl stat, like saying Eli Manning won more Super Bowls than Dan Marino, so he's a better quarterback. That's just not the case. So it's like, is there a controversy? Yeah, because you can't bench someone that's been playing competently. Like, let's not act like Cam Newton was good before that foot injury. Like, he was not playing good football. He hasn't played good football for some time. And if he's not able to run the football like he used to, he offers you nothing. Like, he has a massive arm. He has that going for him, but his accuracy is weak. He overthrows his wide receivers. Like, they just need a game manager essentially with the way that defense is playing. So Allen might be better for the team right now, even though, just because his record's 4-0, that doesn't make him a better quarterback, but he might be better for this team right now.
Yeah, now it is worth noting that after the bye, they do have kind of a rough schedule coming out of there with at San Francisco, against the Titans, and at Green Bay. So for the passing offense, it's not lighting it up right now anyway. It's probably been bad for DJ Moore, I would say, with Allen in the game, just because he doesn't target him nearly as much, I think, as Newton did. But, in the end, I don't know. I really don't. I like Allen. I like what I see from him. He's not overly impressive, but with their defense, with McCaffrey, they really just need somebody who's not going to lose the game, and that's what he's been doing. So I don't know what the latest prognosis is on Newton, if there's any timetable for his return necessarily. Tags, have you seen anything?
I think they're going to continue to mask this and say that we're not even going to talk about it until Cam's 100%, and it's like they can continue to use that as the excuse to start Kyle Allen so they don't look bad to the press. Because everybody's going to question, why are you benching an MVP? Well, Cam Newton had 1 MVP season, guys. Like, as a passer, he's below average. I'm sorry.
And someone else who was below average as a passer today was Jameis Winston. 30 for 54, 400 yards, 1 touchdown, 5 picks, plus a lost fumble. I mean, Chris Godwin and Mike Evans still get theirs. Godwin, 10 for 151. Evans, 9 for 98 on 17 targets. I mean, look, I know they were missing their 2 offensive linemen here. I don't really know what the takeaways are here. I mean, is Winston still a streamable option or what?
Yeah, this is the problem with Jameis Winston. And I actually, every week I write up a buy and sell and hold report, and I had Jameis Winston as a sell last week because I said Jameis Winston is going to be, he's going to finish as a top 12 quarterback. That's going to happen. The issue with Jameis Winston is that you don't know when these blow up performances are going to happen. It's also the same reason that on our show throughout the week, on this podcast, like throughout the week, our start sit episode, our waiver wire episode, I said, grab the Panthers, because it's like they're going to get pressure on Jameis Winston. And once Winston makes one bad mistake, it compounds. And then all of a sudden you're going to have the number 1 defense for that week. Jameis Winston turned the ball over, what was it, 6 times today?
Yeah, and on the first play. On the first play of the game, he threw an interception, and that was it. That was done.
I thought you were making a joke. I'm like, didn't he turn the ball over 6 times? You're like, yeah, on the first play, he turned the ball over 6 times.
That would have been a good joke. Oh, I'm the worst. No, yes, he turned it over 6 times, 5 picks, plus a lost fumble. He also fumbled another time right before he lost the fumble, so he could have, easily had an even worse day. But yeah, he turned the ball over. First play from scrimmage, passed it, threw an interception, and it was like, you're right, you could see it. Once that happened, it was like, oh God, this is not going to be a good day for Winston, so it's unfortunate. Real quick, let's go to the running game here. Barber, 8 for 28 on the ground. Ronald Jones, 4 for 10 on the ground. He does score the touchdown. Dario Ngwale also gets a short touchdown late. I assume that you are never starting any Bucs running back for the moment. Are you even owning a Bucs running back at this point?
Ronald Jones is the only one I'll own, but I'm not going to start him confidently. Like, bye weeks are coming up, and Jones, he continues to look like the best running back out there. Bruce Arians seems to be a smart dude, but he seems to make rookies like earn their stripes. Even though, Ronald Jones is not really a rookie. I think we kind of consider him that because it was like he was redshirted last year. Going back to David Johnson with the Cardinals, remember he was returning kicks to start the year, and it was like it took a while for Bruce Arians to come around. Peyton Barber's not the answer. That much we do know, and that's the part that's so frustrating to me. It's like maybe Ronald Jones isn't that, but he's looked really good when you give him the friggin' ball, and we know Peyton Barber. We've seen him get like literally a workhorse role for an entire season, and we know he's not the guy. So,
yep. Well, hopefully, they have the bye this week because they have the London game. So hopefully they come out of the bye when they continue their ridiculous schedule here where they don't go home at all until week 10 or whatever it is, and they make some changes. And hopefully the change is that Jones gets to see more work because he didn't have an impressive game in this one, 4 carries, 10 yards. He did look good on the touchdown run, but he's clearly the more impressive back. So hopefully they go to him. Now, before we keep going, I want to, I mentioned Grammarly earlier, but I really want to thank them again for supporting the show. I am not an old man. I'm 39, but I have an old man streak where I really think that people just do not put enough emphasis on writing and communicating effectively anymore. I read a lot of writing samples and a lot of cover letters, and when I see grammatical mistakes, it kind of makes my skin crawl. But Grammarly really, really helps with that. Grammarly is a writing assistant that helps you improve yourself and the way you communicate at school or at work or over email or pretty much any time you write anything. It's available across a ton of platforms, including online browser extensions, desktop editors, and mobile keyboard checker. So it works on pretty much all browsers. And one of the things I do at FantasyPros is I manage our news desks, and I work with our correspondents to help them improve, especially on their grammar. And there was this one correspondent who was really frustrating because his stuff always needed a ton of edits. And suddenly, his stuff became really, really clean and crisp and clear. And I told him how much he had improved, and he said it was just because he had started using Grammarly. And if you really want to be your best self, check out Grammarly Premium, which looks out for spelling, grammar, plus advanced punctuation, structure, style within context, vocabulary suggestions, conciseness, and readability for different occasions like a business proposal, an academic essay, or even a casual blog post. Just go to Grammarly.com/FantasyPros to get 20% off your Grammarly Premium account today. That's Grammarly.com/FantasyPros for 20% off your Grammarly Premium account. All right, Tags, let's move on to Texans 31, Chiefs 24. Bit of a mixed bag here for the Texans fantasy-wise. Deshaun Watson throws for a touchdown, runs for 2 more. He does get picked twice. Carlos Hyde, 26 for 116 and a touchdown, plus a 14-yard catch. He did lose the early fumble, but they stuck with him. But Darren Fells is the leading receiver for the Chiefs. 6 catches for 69 yards. Will Fuller sees 9 targets. He has 5 catches for 44 yards. Whatever. To me, this is what Will Fuller is. There are the boom weeks. There are a lot of these types of weeks. But 9 catches for just 55 yards for DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, we love the 12 targets, but I have not yet seen the average depth of those targets, but they may have been negative. What is happening here with Hopkins?
I'm actually going to pull it up right now because I watched a lot of that game and it was so frustrating to see DeAndre Hopkins used the way he was. His average depth of target was 6.2 yards down the field. They essentially turned him into Adam Humphries today.
Why are they doing this? What is happening right now with Hopkins? I keep telling people, don't worry about it. This is going to come. I don't know if I'm as optimistic anymore.
It was so disappointing watching this game because Hopkins, I had him in some DFS lineups that could have done really well, but he kind of dragged them down, and I can't say it's his fault. Although I will say, Deshaun Watson's stat line, his 30 of 42 passing for 280, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. It doesn't look great, but he actually had a lot better day than that. There were 4 touchdowns that were dropped, 3 alone by Will Fuller and 1 by DeAndre Hopkins. Hopkins didn't drop any passes last year. This year he's been dropping quite a few of them, and which is weird because last year he said he played through an injury. I don't understand what his role in the offense was today. I'm still going to buy DeAndre Hopkins. We have way too big of a sample size to know what the type of player he is. Will Fuller, again, he came back down to earth, but knowing that he dropped 3 touchdowns, his ceiling is there every single week. And we've seen it in years past where it was with Deshaun Watson on the field, Will Fuller was always he was a stud, and almost you wanted to play him like a wide receiver too. I think we're back in that territory with how often he's targeting the air yards that he had in this matchup. He was consistently targeted. Even after he dropped the ball, he saw 44% of the team's air yards today. So I'm still, Will Fuller, his stock actually trended up for me in today's game. DeAndre Hopkins maybe a little bit down, but I'm still buying DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah, I mean, he's still a top 5 receiver for you, right? I just want to make sure it is getting frustrating. I'm not going to lie. And really what it was is the fact that, yes, as watching that game, it just felt like they were barely targeting him at all past the line of scrimmage. And it was just insane, really, to watch. Fuller, I agree on, although I really need to see what it's going to look like when Kenny Stills comes back, right? Because we thought about what it would be with Kiki QT on the field, but QT is just not that involved. Stills was pretty involved when he was healthy. So I do want to see what happens with Fuller when all of those guys are healthy. But for now, I agree. This game does not move me off Fuller at all. I mean, it's the fact he could have had a much bigger game, but it's also something where this is kind of what's going to happen. He sees 9 targets. You'll definitely live with that. On the other side of the ball, the Chiefs, we already talked about the running game. So, I mean, look, Tyreek Hill comes back, has the 2 touchdowns. Big game there. Patrick Mahomes, not great for him, but good for Immortal. But, let me ask you very briefly about Travis Kelce, sort of in the same way we want to talk about DeAndre Hopkins. 6 targets, 4 catches, 58 yards. He has 1 touchdown on the season. He's topped 100 yards once. His production is great for a mortal tight end. But do you expect him to pick it up and be more like the guy he was last year? Because again, there aren't really Hill has been out and Watkins is out here. There aren't really many other great secondary targets here. So what do you think's going on here with Kelce?
I am buying him wherever I possibly can. I actually was looking up some stats earlier, and he is on pace for, I think, 11 fewer yards than he had last year. So he's basically on another record-breaking pace. The touchdowns just haven't been there. He's had 1 touchdown compared to the 10 last year. They're going to pick up. Like, right now is your chance to go to the Travis Kelce owner who probably spent a late first-round pick, early second-round pick on him, and then, like, literally all year long they've been cursing themselves because it's like, I knew it. I should have taken Michael Thomas, or I should have taken whoever, like they're cursing themselves. Maybe, just maybe, you're able to sneak in there and get Travis Kelce at like a 3rd round price. If you can do that, like I'm willing to pay 2nd round prices for Travis Kelce right now. Like legitimately, I will pay top dollar, because if you take a look around a tight end right now, it is a friggin' disaster. Like it is so ugly. And I think that we lost Will Dissly to a year-ending injury. So if we don't have him, it's like we're down to like 6 tight ends that we could feel confident starting every single week. So even though Kelce hasn't started out like you'd hoped, like George Kittle started out that way too, and all of a sudden people are hyped about George Kittle. Travis Kelce has been very, 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 very good. It's just a matter of he hasn't been very elite just yet. That's coming. So buy Travis Kelce.
Yeah, I ask really because, I do the trade chart every week and people get real mad at his trade value, arguing that it should be much lower. Because, again, if you own him, you're starting him and you're happy. Tight end is a wasteland. One of the other things on the trade chart is that all I keep doing is removing the number of tight ends that even register for any sort of value in a trade. It's like 5 at this point. But that's the thing. People are upset about what he's doing. It hasn't been nearly as bad as people are perceiving it to be. And I agree the best is yet to come. The lack of touchdowns really kind of stands out to you because that's where, you see all the fantasy points necessarily coming from. And I think that's why fantasy owners are getting a little perturbed at this point. But in the end, I agree with Tags. Go ahead and buy. Let's move on to Ravens 23. Bengals 17. Look, last week I questioned whether Lamar Jackson should still be a top 3 quarterback with his struggles passing the ball. Well, with Hollywood Brown out, he doesn't look great passing, but 152 yards rushing and a score that kind of makes up for it there. Mark Andrews, another big game, 99 yards. He does lose a fumble. Let's talk briefly about the running game, although if there's anything you want to talk about with Jackson, I will let you, but let's talk briefly just about the running game here. Mark Ingram, 13 for 52 on the ground. He does get the short touchdown, 2 catches for 22 yards. Gus Edwards sees his usual 6 carries. He gains 34 yards, but Justice Hill now sees 5 carries for 31 yards. So we both had Ingram ranked as a decent RB2.5 PPR going forward. Are you concerned at all here with now it's not only Edwards that's siphoning carries off of him, but I guess Justice Hill?
Not really.
Do you think this is a game-specific plan that happened here, or do you just think that regardless, if basically other running backs are going to see 10 to 12 carries in the game, it's really not going to matter for Ingram?
Mark Ingram's opportunity has not been great. Like, I want to be clear about that. Like, as I mentioned, my Saturday night was filled looking at opportunity, and Mark Ingram is not like one of the higher opportunity running backs. And Bobby talked about him being like a smash play in DFS this week, and I wasn't about it because it's like he's getting 70% of the red zone carries, which Gus Edwards getting 30%. That's not a small amount. Ingram's been getting 59% of the carries on the team as a whole. So it's not like he's a workhorse running back. He's barely involved in the passing game. So it's like there's so many things with him. But the reason that he's still considered a top 20 running back for the rest of the season is because the running back position as a whole is like, it's just full of timeshares. And it's like you'd probably take Ingram over someone like Joe Mixon, who's tied to a bad offense that's not being used in the passing game. You'd probably take him over a James Conner, who, again, part of a bad offense, hasn't looked particularly good himself. So it's kind of like he's a top 20 running back by default, not because he's just like a great player or anything.
All right, let's actually talk about Joe Mixon since you brought him up. I mean, another game, Tags. 8 for 10 on the ground, 2 for 29 through the air. Now, Ravens are tough against the run whenever Brandon Williams is in there, but the Bengals don't have the greatest schedule. Is Mixon a must-start option each week? And by that, I mean like a solid RB2. I mean, you could have 2 running backs higher than him, but a solid RB2 that you're pretty much starting each week?
I moved him down to 21 among running backs moving forward. Like, I would probably take Josh Jacobs over him, which it really sucks to say that because the Raiders aren't a really good football team. I don't think Jacobs is a better running back than Joe Mixon, but the opportunity has increased. And, we heard Gruden talk about getting Jacobs more involved in the passing game. And that's just something we haven't seen with Joe Mixon. And that's the frustrating part about it because Mixon is probably the most underutilized player I've ever seen. Like, I see in the NFL right now in the passing game, like in terms of what he can bring to a team and how he should be used. He should be used like David Johnson. He should be used like Le'Veon Bell, but he's not. And it's really disappointing considering, the Bengals are without John Ross. They're without AJ Green. Like the targets, he should be seeing 5+ targets a game.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, I already, I believe, had him 19th coming into the week. And we both had Jacobs 20th. I agree. I'm dropping him behind Jacobs. If for no other reason, by the way, than Jacobs is through his bye, which at this point kind of matters. It always matters, but it certainly matters in rest of season rankings. But I agree. There's no reason to be optimistic at this point, and it's really, really frustrating because I really love his talent. Elsewhere on the Bengals, I mean, I don't think there's too much to talk about here. They were, they kept it close, but they were beaten by a better team. Andy Dalton scores the late rushing touchdown. Auden Tate sees 12 targets, 5 passes, 5 catches for 91 yards. Tyler Boyd pretty much shut down, 3 catches for 10 yards. Anything that you really think is actionable here other than Mixon?
No, I mean, Auden Tate looked pretty good. He made a few like highlight reel grabs where it's like when AJ Green comes back, it's like teams are going to have some trouble because both these guys are very big men. And it sounds like AJ Green has a possibility that comes back next week. And that would be awesome because I like watching AJ Green play football. But Tyler Boyd being shadowed by Marlon Humphrey was something that I didn't know if it would happen or not, but it did. And Tyler Boyd paid the price, but that was his first down game. I don't want to look too far into it. Most of the time, opponents aren't going to use their shadow cornerback to cover a guy that's in the slot 60% of the time. So I'll take this as a one-off situation for Tyler Boyd.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I had zero concerns about Boyd. I didn't expect this either, but certainly I'm not at all moving him in rest of season rankings based on this game. Let's move on to Saints 13, Jaguars 6. Alvin Kamara, a little bit banged up this week in practice, plays through it, gains 66 total yards. Latavius Murray sees 11 touches, 77 yards. Jared Cook finds the end zone. Michael Thomas, his usual self, 12 targets, 8 catches, 89 yards. I assume you've probably got 2 more games here before Drew Brees returns after the bye. Is there anything here of note with the Saints? Because there wasn't anything for me.
No, this was like legit one of the worst games I watched in a long time. It was terrible.
I agree. And legitimately nobody moves in that's really what I look at for these things. What is the effect on our rest of season outlook on these guys? For me, 0 change in my rest of season outlook for the Saints in this game.
Yep. That's exactly how I feel. And like the Kamara thing, I did downgrade him. I think I moved him down to like RB9 for the week, considering like the ankle injury and not knowing how much he'd be used. But he did, 18 touches. It's not like he was lightly used. It was a bit disappointing in a good matchup against Jacksonville, who had, coming into this game, they had allowed the most yards per carry to running backs.
Moving on to the Jaguars, Leonard Fournette, really the only bright spot. He continues to get it done largely. Again, he is very involved in the passing game, 118 total yards. DJ Chark held to just 43 yards. D.D. Westbrook, 53 yards. Gardner Minshew, just 163 yards passing and a pick. They get the Bengals next. That's a far easier matchup, but, any real takeaways here on the Jaguar side of the ball? You think Minshew magic is over, Tags? Is that what you got or what?
I don't want to say it's over because he was someone that Bobby liked this week, and I told him, I was like, I don't like him this week. I feel like the Saints they're going to take away DJ Chark with Marshawn Lattimore. It's going to be a tough matchup, and it's going to force him to do some things that he hasn't really done yet. And D.D. Westbrook got targeted 8 times, but he didn't pan out like I had hoped. So D.D. Westbrook was the biggest disappointment in this game for me. Leonard Fournette continues to see crazy opportunity. Like outside of Christian McCaffrey, there is nobody in the league that is seeing more opportunity in terms of like potential and what he should be scoring in fantasy football than Leonard Fournette. And that includes guys like Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, Nick Chubb, those guys. So yeah, Leonard Fournette is like, he's obviously, a must start, but with his opportunity, you could actually argue that he should be like a top 5 running back the rest of the season.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, again, the passing is it's crazy because he was never really that guy. And it's one of the things where they talked about it in the preseason and they actually followed through on it, which makes me really excited. I own Fournette. I have a lot of stock in him this year. And, I'm satisfied, I think is the word that I could say, because he could have so much more than he does, but what he has is pretty darn good at this point. So if you're looking at him, he's not, whatever he is, this is basically how I think I'd value him at this point. He could be a lot higher, but given how much he's getting, it's pretty satisfying, at least for me. Before we move on, I want to remind you guys about the Betting Pros NFL podcast, which I host, and which is pretty good, in my opinion. We've got 2 episodes each week. One which drops late Monday night, during which we examine the opening lines for the next week's games, and we give our early thoughts, and the other which drops late Thursday night, during which we give our best bets for the week. And even if you are not yet into sports betting, that's fine. A lot of the information there is beneficial from a fantasy perspective, like when my top prop bet was Stefon Diggs over 59.5 yards today. We also have autographed helmet giveaways, which you can check out at bettingpros.com/contest. Just search for Betting Pros or Betting Pros NFL in your podcast app to find us. Or go straight to bettingpros.com/podcasts. All right, Tags, let's move on to Vikings 38, Eagles 20. I think we pretty much did the Vikings at this point because we talked about the passing game. Dalvin Cook does find the end zone, but just 41 yards on the ground. Alexander Mattison gets some good garbage time work, and Kirk Cousins, 333 yards with 4 TDs. Anything else you want to say about the Vikings other than what we really talked about, which was the receivers?
Yeah, no, not too much here. It was surprising to see Alexander Mattison see as many carries as he did. I know some people might look at the final score and think it was all garbage time, but it really wasn't. Like, this game was actually pretty close at points. It seemed like the Vikings were pulling away, and then all of a sudden the Eagles were back in it, and that's why we saw Cousins throw more than I think people thought he would have. My biggest takeaway from this game as a whole would be to go attack the Eagles' offensive skill players that you could potentially buy low on, like a Deshaun Jackson, if you can get him for next to nothing right now. Alshon Jeffrey had a big game, so it's going to be tough to pull him away, but Zach Ertz is another one I'm buying, like along with Travis Kelce. Ertz, he leads the NFL in targets among tight ends. So it's like the opportunity is there. He'll start capitalizing on that. When they have Deshaun Jackson there to stretch the field, it's going to open things up for everybody. So Carson Wentz, he's another one that, if someone drops him or if someone wants to get rid of him and they want to kind of just sell low, I guess, I'm attacking that team just because it's similar to the Falcons, where their defense has been so bad that you're going to see them continually rack up the passing attempts, and that's good for all fantasy skill players involved. And that's the only reason that Alshon Jeffrey had a good game today, is because there were 40 pass attempts to go around.
Yeah, now, it is worth noting, again, their schedule doesn't exactly lighten up on the defensive front. Dallas isn't great, but at Buffalo is tough, Chicago, and then the bye, and then the Pats. So it is a little tough, but I agree, and I was going to really ask you about Ertz in the same way as Kelce. He's got oddly enough, between 54 and 72 yards in every game. That's consistent, and really for a tight end, that's not terrible. Ertz owners expect more. But you're saying essentially go ahead and buy low on pretty much every Eagles skill player. Good enough for me. Seahawks 32, Browns 28. Russell Wilson is not human. 295 yards passing plus 2 touchdowns, as on 31 yards rushing and a score. We mentioned earlier, I don't think it's confirmed, so I want to make that clear, but it apparently seems very likely that Will Dissly tore his Achilles. I assume that injury does not change your opinion that Russell Wilson is a rock solid top 5 quarterback rest of season, right?
Yeah, it's like no matter who they put out there in front of him, he just does what he does. And I said in the primer this week that Russell Wilson should be the front runner for MVP, and that was before this game, and it still holds true.
Absolutely. Tyler Lockett, 5 targets, 5 catches, 75 yards. Chris Carson, another really strong game here, which I love to see, 159 total yards. Meanwhile, Rashad Penny was inactive, but his backup, CJ Prosise, actually loses a fumble, which only punctuated the point that this is not an issue for Carson anymore. I don't really think there's much else to talk about here. I mean, I assume you have no interest in Jaron Brown, who caught 2 touchdown passes, right?
No, he's a non-factor for me. Like he's sharing snaps with Malik Turner, with David Moore. Those guys are sharing snaps. But DK Metcalf is a winner with Will Dissly, potentially out for the year, because Dissly had been a good red zone option, and DK is like that big size speed freak that we could see Russell Wilson start to develop an attachment to in the red zone, similar to he would tight end. So Metcalf is someone that his stock did go up today.
Yeah, I mean, I think this Seattle offense, because of what Wilson is able to do, is pretty much matchup proof. But coming up on the schedule, they're going to be going up against Atlanta. They're going up against the Bucs. They've got a couple of soft ones there. So there should be a lot of goodness for fantasy owners. On the other side of the ball, Nick Chubb dominates again, 139 total yards, 2 scores. He does lose a fumble. Odell Beckham Jr. does see 11 targets. Looks like they made a really concerted effort to get him the ball. 6 catches, 101 yards. Jarvis Landry nearly scores a touchdown, but winds up with just 3 for 36. Baker Mayfield throws for a touchdown, runs for 1, but he battled through what I think it was a left shoulder injury tag. I don't know if that's, I know he went back to the locker room and he came back. He didn't look particularly right. Any takeaways here from the Brown side of the ball?
Yeah, I didn't know what the injury was because it seemed like he hunched back. Like I thought it might have been a back injury. I didn't know what it was because I don't listen to the commentators when watching the games because it just would drive me nuts. So I don't know what happened to Mayfield in terms of what the injury was. I probably should have checked Twitter beforehand, but he played through it. So I'm assuming that he's going to be fine. Quarterbacks, if it was a serious injury.
They have a bye next week anyway, so I'm sure it'll be okay.
Yeah, that would definitely help. But it seems like he's trying to force the ball at Odell Beckham, and him and Beckham, they're not on the same page, those guys. And Beckham, I don't know if it's a clash of personalities because Beckham is like flailing his hands up in the air. Mayfield is like, he's obviously a guy that's been cocky his entire life. So if someone's questioning him, I just wonder, and people brought this up this offseason, is there too many personalities in this locker room? And I'm not going to say yes. I won't say that because I still think that they're both talented and that they should be able to coexist. But it's clear when watching them that they're just not on the same page most of the time.
This has potential to be disastrous. I think, with the personalities in the locker room, I talked about it a lot on the Betting Pros podcast, which was if they get off to a bad start, you don't know what's going to happen in that locker room, right? Because you got all the personalities. All right, out of curiosity, just put a point on it. Where do you have Odell Beckham Jr. in your rest of season wide receiver rankings, half PPR?
I have Odell Beckham as the number 9 wide receiver the rest of the season.
That's good. You don't have to explain it. I'm not kidding. You don't have to explain it because that's exactly where I'm going to be. And that's fine. I just want to make it clear because, again, this is not a game where people are going to be like, ugh, but people are frustrated with Beckham. Understandably, the offense has not looked good, but you and I both have him. He's not where he was preseason for me. I mean, I've dropped him certainly, but he's still a wide receiver 1. So I just want to make that point clear. I assume that's where you were, so I'm there too. Let's move on to the most exciting game of the weekend. Redskins 17, Dolphins 16, a game that only gamblers and fantasy owners could possibly love. For the Redskins, look, fantasy owners wanted 2 good performances from Adrian Peterson and Terry McLaurin. They got them. Peterson gains 136 total yards. McLaurin catches 4 passes for 100 yards. Let me put it like this. True or false, Tags? So long as Case Keenum is the quarterback, you can start Terry McLaurin as a wide receiver 3, and this was the last game this season that you could consider starting Adrian Peterson. True or false?
I will say it's definitely true on Peterson. He's droppable. Like if you could find someone to buy him, be like maybe you find someone to be like, oh, Peterson under the Bill Callahan is going to be worth something. I'm dropping him. The upcoming matchups are terrible, and if anything, I'm buying Chris Thompson. But in regards to Terry McLaurin, I would actually go as far as to say he's like a borderline wide receiver 2.
Wow. Okay. All right. I mean, look, he was certainly getting targeted. And again, I said this, oddly enough, and we make picks, as I said on the Betting Pros podcast. I took the Dolphins plus 3.5, so I won the bet. I did say that I was a little worried because Case Keenum was the starter again, which told you all you really needed to know about the Redskins. But yeah, when he's there, it's at least competent, and we've seen what he can do with McLaurin. So that's fine. I have him certainly as a solid wide receiver 3. I'm going to look at it, but he's a guy who you can start each week. For the Dolphins, don't tell Brian Flores that they're tanking, okay? I mean, he replaces an ineffective Josh Rosen with Ryan Fitzpatrick, who nearly works the Fitzmagic and goes for 2 to win the game. So that was nice to see. And Kenyon Drake actually sees 16 touches and gains 70 yards, but of course, Kalen Ballage gets the touchdown. Devontae Parker scores a touchdown, but just 28 total yards. Preston Williams disappointing, just 31 yards. Any thoughts whatsoever on the Dolphins, or do you just want to move on?
I ideally just move on.
That's fine.
I wondered though, like, why did they go for 2 at the end of the game? Like, I know that like the rule is when you're on the road and you have a chance to tie or go for the lead, you go for the lead. And that makes sense with home field advantage. But, they were at home. And it's like part of me always wonders, it's like, did they have a conversation and Flores goes up to Kenyon Drake, hey, you want to get traded? Like, drop this pass. or like don't score. So it was comical to see them almost win that game, because that game could have very well determined who gets first pick in the draft.
No, absolutely. So I bet they're secretly happy, but it was nice to see, even though I did not understand the move. I agree. It was nice to see that, at least, unless he did secretly whisper, you can't really claim that Brian Flores is tanking. Let's move on to the late games here. 49ers 20, Rams 7. We'll get to the Rams and the quarterback issues, but again, the 49ers, man, they are for real. Jimmy Garoppolo, 243 yards. He does not throw a touchdown. He does run for one, though. He does have a pick. Tevin Coleman, 18 carries, 45 yards, and a touchdown. Matt Breida, 13 carries, 36 yards. George Kittle, 8 for 8, all of his targets for 103 yards. Nobody else really gets involved. Anything you want to say here about the 49ers?
Oh, they're a team that's going to start trading for players, I would assume, at the trade deadline. Like, they've proven to be a contender, and there's so many people giving them props on Twitter, and I mean, I've slowly come around to say, this defense is legit. I mean, they changed a lot with that front seven, and it showed. They're making life easier on the secondary, but it does help that Jared Goff just sucks. Jared Goff played like crap. He's played like crap for the past, going back to week 12 of last year. Jared Goff has not been good. There's really no way to put it, and I've continually highlighted this, and someone asked me earlier today, it was so funny. I love when things pan out like this, is because I had Jameis Winston as like my number 9 quarterback or number 10 quarterback this week, so obviously that wasn't a great call, but whatever. It is what it is, and we know that Jameis comes with some ups and downs. But someone asked if they should start Jameis Winston or Jared Goff. And I said, I'm not really a big fan of Goff this week. I'd go with Winston. And after Winston threw for 400 yards and 1 touchdown and 5 interceptions, I got some not so nice tweets and crickets after Jared Goff, throws for like 70 some yards. So it's been so bad. Basically, if Todd Gurley's not out there performing well, Jared Goff has been terrible. I can't even answer it. I can't answer, like, how does that mean fantasy success for Jared Goff? I don't know. I can't answer it, but something is going on with him. And now it's like going over, I think it's like his last 13 games now, including the playoffs. He's averaging like 1 touchdown per game. Yeah,
just to be clear, it's 78 yards passing on the day. The leading receiver was Tyler Higbee, who caught...
It looks like a Luke Falk-led team.
That don't stop. Just not necessary, but accurate, but not necessary. Let me ask something very quickly. Does the way he's looked lately, are you downgrading the Rams wide receivers, or are you just saying, look, they're able to put up this production one way or another, so I'm leaving them essentially where they are, which are all, wide receiver 2s at least, right?
I'd been lowering Robert Woods, and I'm so mad that he ran for a touchdown today, because I had him ranked, like, I was one of the lower experts on him. I had him like 26 among wide receivers. I didn't want any part of him. And granted, he didn't catch a single pass, but he ran for a touchdown. That's something that's hard to predict. But I'm slowly lowering everybody down, honestly. And it seems like Gurley is the key to this offense. And if he's not going, then the offense isn't going. I know the 49ers are a much improved defense, but the Rams look worse than any other team in the NFL this week.
Well, they do get the Falcons next week, so hopefully that can at least change things.
If there's anyone that could turn Jared Goff around, it's the Atlanta Falcons.
And the Falcons, in fact, lost to the Cardinals, 34-33 in an entertaining game. Poor Matt Bryant cannot convert the extra point, and they lose by a point. Kyler Murray, look, it's a great matchup. Everybody liked him. 340 yards and 3 touchdowns. He also runs for 32 yards, so it's nice to see him continuing to contribute on the ground. David Johnson rushes for a touchdown, only 34 yards, while Chase Edmonds also gained 34 yards, but on 5 carries instead of Johnson's 12. Johnson also finds the end zone through the air, 6 catches, 68 yards, and a touchdown. Chase Edmonds also finds a touchdown through the air. Larry Fitzgerald, 6 for 69. I mean, I feel like this is just kind of what we expected, given the matchup. But anything you want to talk about here on the Cardinals side of the ball?
No, Kyler Murray looked really good. Honestly, it was better than I'd seen him look this season. I did watch probably 80% of this game in terms of my attention where it was focused, because this was a game that I was heavily invested in DFS in. And if Matt Bryant would have made that kick, Matt Ryan may have won me a tournament. So I'm a little salty about that. David Johnson, I talked about it a lot on the live stream this morning, and I was saying that even if David Johnson plays, because he's been dealing with that back injury, I think we're going to start to see Chase Edmonds eat into some of the production. And this kind of goes back to what Bobby talked about in the preseason, and I really did understand the logic, because if Kingsbury wanted to run 70 plays per game, I said there's no running back that's going to hold up for that. You have to sub him in and out, otherwise you're going to run him ragged. And they weren't doing it with Johnson. Johnson was like the workhorse, and now the last 2 weeks we've seen Edmonds involved, and it seems like Chase Edmonds might have that, I don't want to say Austin Eckler role, because he's not seeing as many targets, but he's involved. He's absolutely involved in the game plan, and he's doing good. On limited touches, he came in, scored a touchdown this week. He scored a touchdown last week. But on the live stream, I had mentioned that I thought he could be a flex type start even if David Johnson played. So I'm really happy to see that come to fruition. But everything just comes back to the Falcons. Terrible.
Dan Quinn may be fired by the time people are listening to this podcast, I feel like.
Oh, he's fired. He's fired. I don't know if it's yet, because Steve Sarkisian took the fall for this team last year, and that was the stupidest thing ever, because he was not the problem. Dan Quinn has always been the problem, and I'm really curious to see what this team can do.
Well, look, offensively, again, Ryan was 30 of 36. It's a great matchup, of course, for the Cardinals. 30 of 36, though. Incredibly impressive. 356 through the air, 4 touchdowns. Look, you talked about Devonta Freeman. You were, again, great matchup, but you were certainly more bullish on him than I was generally in a rest of season. Now, look, 19 for 88 on the ground. He also catches 3 passes, 30 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Calvin Ridley finds the end zone early on, not too involved. Austin Hooper, of course, 8 targets, 8 catches, 117 yards, and a touchdown. Julio Jones does not find the end zone, but 9 targets, 8 catches, 108 yards. This doesn't change anything for me on the Falcons offense. It was a great matchup. It's a good offense. You want a piece of the offense, generally speaking. Does it do anything for you, anybody here, at all?
I've said it all along. I want Matt Ryan. And if you want to tell me he's the number 2 fantasy quarterback rest of the season, I got no issues with it. I want all of it, because it's every week we're going to have the conversation. Is Julio Jones going to get it? Is Calvin Ridley, Mohamed Sanu's involved? Austin Hooper's the number 1 tight end. And it's you start going through this and you're the Falcons defense is terrible. And all it means is pass attempts. And Matt Ryan, obviously delivering 30 of 36 for 356 and 4. Yeah, it's kind of like the whole Carson Wentz thing. It's the Eagles, Carson Wentz, this could be your buying opportunity, where it's once he gets Deshaun Jackson back, you're going to have the same issues trying to project the Eagles skill position players. And that's why you want Carson Wentz.
Yeah, well, for Ryan, you're right. I think I'm looking at my rankings. I had him 7th coming into this week, and that's embarrassing, actually, now that I'm looking at it. It really is. I'm not even kidding. That sounds hyperbolic, but I'm serious. I really, there's no reason for me to have Dak Prescott ahead of him. And let's move on to that game where my Jets, 24-22. I feel pretty good about this, only because as much as people were killing Adam Gase, who is not a good head coach, it was Luke Falk, as you mentioned. Anybody drawing any conclusions from what they saw, I thought was just ridiculous. I'm a big Darnold guy. I think he has a really, really bright future. And I thought that the Jets playmakers could really do some good things once he got involved. And it's not exactly like this was the best matchup in the world, but in the end, Le'Veon Bell, 14 for 50 on the ground, not that great, but he does score the touchdown. And he wasn't really involved in the passing game, which was a little surprise, only 1 reception for 3 yards. Robby Anderson, again, this was not a matchup for Robby Anderson, really. Dallas does not allow the big sort of play over the top or anything like that. They usually leave things in front of them. They allow some yards after the catch, but Anderson, 8 targets, 5 catches, 125 yards, and a touchdown, most of that on the 92-yard score. Jamison Crowder, again, keep seeing the targets. 9 targets, 6 catches, 98 yards. Takeaways from the Jets side of the ball with Darnold back there.
That Robby Anderson, you probably missed your buy low window. I wanted to buy low before last week's game, thinking he'd get something done, even with Luke Falk. This was not a matchup that I expected him to do much, but honestly, he got loose for the one play, and that's all that matters with someone like Robby Anderson, because he's a one-play guy. It's a guy that could return wide receiver 3 value on one play, and that's why I think some people wanted to target him as a wide receiver 3 this year. It's just, getting those, it's going to be difficult to predict, but they do have a schedule coming up that should allow him for more good performances, so I think your buy low window slammed shut on him. Demaryius Thomas Thomas obviously involved. He doesn't look too bad. Another one coming off an Achilles injury. I still don't think that there's enough volume to go around and support multiple wide receivers in this offense. So I don't want to go too crazy about him, especially with Chris Herndon. Does he come back? Doesn't he come back? Le'Veon Bell getting targeted once. There was just so many things in this game that it was like a little off, and I don't know if we could take much from it because we've only seen Sam Darnold start 2 games, under Adam Gase. So we really can't take too much away from the target distribution just on a small sample size.
Yeah, I completely agree with the Robby Anderson point. I thought you could have bought low after this game. I thought this was the game after this. You'd be like, okay, now go ahead. Because I really didn't expect very much from him in this game. But again, he always has the potential for the 80, 90-yard touchdown. That's what it is. But it was good to see the targets there. That's what I really, really like to see there. And I do think that, the buy low window has slammed shut. But if for some reason it hasn't, if you want to look at it and be like, well, they draw New England next, they're really tough. And maybe you could, talk about the fact that they have Jacksonville and maybe, talk about Jalen Ramsey if he comes back or something like that. They go ahead and do it. On the Dallas side of the ball, look, it's just, Amari Cooper was injured pretty early in this game. I think it was his quad?
Yeah, that's what they're calling the quad injury, yeah.
Yeah, it didn't look overly serious. I don't want to draw any conclusions or anything like that. He did miss almost the entire game. So Prescott, 28 of 40 for 277 yards. He doesn't throw a touchdown pass, but he does run for one. Zeke finds the end zone, 28 for 105 with a touchdown. Your leading receiver is Tavon Austin for 6 targets, 5 catches, 64 yards. Just not a great day. Michael Gallup only 4 for 48. Anything here that you take away from the Dallas side, or is it just once Amari Cooper went out, it just changed the offense?
No, if Cooper's going to miss time, Michael Gallup is a guy that should basically see 8+ targets per game. He saw 7 targets in this game, and even with Amari Cooper active and playing the games prior to this, the air yards and actual opportunity between those 2 players was very, very, very close. It's just Amari had been a little bit more efficient, but still, Gallup is a guy that should be considered a wide receiver 3 at worst, even with Amari in the lineup. But if Amari misses time, Michael Gallup is a target monster, and obviously receives a bump in the rankings if Cooper had to miss some time.
Yeah, you want to start him every week pretty much, in my opinion, regardless of Cooper. But certainly if Cooper is gone, then he's going to be a rock-solid guy who you'll put in your lineup. Let's move on to our last game here. Broncos 16, Titans nothing. Notable for really 2 reasons. One, we already talked about Emmanuel Sanders sustained an injury. We do not know the severity yet, so we're not really going to speculate on that. But Marcus Mariota benched for Ryan Tannehill. Mariota was terrible, 7 of 18 for 63 yards and 2 touchdowns. It's not, Tannehill was 13 of 16, so that's certainly better for 144 yards. Also throws a pick. Since we're talking about the Titans, let's just stick with them. Derrick Henry, 15 for 28. Adam Humphries, your leading receiver, 6 catches for 47 yards. It was ugly. Tags, is this just... you don't really want too many pieces of the Titans offense anyway. I think the only guy you start comfortably is Derrick Henry. He even had, of course, a terrible game. But, anything here to draw from in terms of the Titans?
It's crazy to see how short of a leash Mariota was on, just because, those were his first 2 interceptions of the year. He had been playing such a cautious game, and so many people were looking at his stats thinking that he was better. And I told people, he hasn't been great. He hasn't turned the ball over, which is obviously a good thing, but he's not going to change your offense. And it kind of blew my mind that he was benched so quickly. Denver's been actually pretty good against quarterbacks this year, surprisingly, even though they haven't generated a whole lot of pressure. The secondary's just played better than I think anybody expected them to. But man, it's really tough to find value here. I keep lowering Corey Davis down my rest of season rankings, and I have him at 56, and I feel like I'm still not low enough for a guy that I want to say, did he see more than 6 targets today? Because I don't think that he saw more than 6 targets over the first 5 games of the season.
He saw 5.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
Tags, I just want to make it clear, I had him 64th coming into today. So you have a ways to go, my friend. You need to keep moving, keep going down, Tags. You could go lower. I'll probably continue to go lower as well. On the other side of the ball, we talked about Sutton already. Joe Flacco just kind of game manages it. Throws for 177 yards, throws a pick. Phillip Lindsay does find the end zone, 15 for 70 with the touchdown on the ground. Royce Freeman sees plenty of carries, 11 for 34. And Freeman actually does more of the damage through the air. 5 targets, 5 catches, 42 yards. Lindsay just 3 targets, 2 catches for 5 yards. This is kind of what it is. You don't really, other than Sutton, which, is borderline, for you. You don't really want a piece of the Broncos offense right now other than the running backs where you can start Lindsay and and Freeman both as RB3s or flex plays or what?
Depends on the matchup. That's actually going to be the Thursday night game against Kansas City. Kansas City, over their last 22 games, have allowed 29 running backs to post 11 or more PPR points. So it's possible that both of them are startable in that Thursday night game. Lindsey is out touching Freeman on the ground. I think it's like a 59. It's like basically like a 60-40 split on the ground. But the crazy part that people don't realize, because like the idea is like Lindsey's a smaller back, people automatically tie that to a pass catcher and like the change of pace back. But Freeman actually has more targets than Lindsey over the past month. It's like 18 to 12, and we're seeing Freeman run more pass routes, which is kind of crazy. It's still Lindsey in a 55-45 split. He's actually someone that I would consider as like a low-end RB2 because he's so efficient with his touches that he does get. And Freeman is more of like, can we, like what's the matchup going to look like? Is there going to be enough touches to go around to project him for 10 plus touches? And if there is, that's when we can start him as like an RB3 flex type.
That is going to do it for today's show. Thanks to Grammarly for supporting the Fantasy Pros Fantasy Football Podcast. Start writing confidently by going to Grammarly.com/fantasypros to get 20% off a Grammarly premium account today. Thanks to our sponsor, Manscaped, the #1 option for men's below-the-belt grooming. To get 20% off plus free shipping, just go to manscaped.com and use the code FANTASYPROS. Enjoy the rest of your Week 5 football, everyone. Tags and Bobby will be back to take you through the waiver wire.